My name is Michael Martens KB9VBR. Been licensed since 1999. And let's see, got my Technician Plus in 99, upgraded to General about 6 months later. And then I think I was my Extra in like 2001 or yeah, around 2001. So it's been kind of doing this for the long haul. A lot of people may know me from either my YouTube channel or also I've been selling VHF and UHF antennas online for several years. But as of recently, as in the last 4 or 5 years, I've had a very vibrant YouTube channel that I started off as sort of a marketing experiment to try to get people, to come to my website and buy an antenna. And well, that channel kind of took off on its own, and now I'm pushing out a new video just about every week. So I did, about a year or 2 years ago, I did talk about DMR or digital mobile radio on my channel, and I thought it'd be kind of nice to sort of revisit things. I know there's still a lot of people interested in it. I think a lot of the initial flurry of activity with DMR is kind of waned or subsided a bit, but there's still a lot about DMR or digital mobile radio that's kind of sort of fascinates and holds on to people. And a lot of people, hams new and old alike, don't really quite maybe understand or comprehend what's all involved with it, because it is sort of a newer digital technology. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about that. I'll see if I can pull up my presentation here on the background, and that's not what I want. And here it is. Okay. I might have to move my phone because I cannot figure out how to share content easily with the phone version here. But basically, DMR or digital mobile radio, it's a worldwide standard. ETSI, worldwide standard, and it uses what's called TDMA or time division multiple access. So what's happening is that and I'll show you another, we'll kind of talk about that in a second, but basically it's the spectrum is being chopped up into little bitty bits and pieces, and so that your information, instead of filling up a section of frequency, it's filling up sections of time. So, if you're thinking about, very common digital radio like Yaesu System Fusion, that uses frequency domain multiple access, where the digital signal goes out through a certain level of frequency, but DMR, it still occupies frequency, but it's sending out 2 channels of information in that frequency space by splitting the frequency up into little bitty chunks. And we'll talk about that in a second. It uses an AMBE +2 codec, which is pretty much it's sort of a standard codec for digital analog conversion. And it also can support applications. But then a lot of people ask, well, why do we want to, why go with DMR? Why digital mobile radio? Well, basically, it's a commercial industry standard. It was created by a consortium between Motorola, Hytera, and a few other radio manufacturers. And so it's got its roots in commercial radio. It's an open standard, so anybody can jump on board. And I think that's what kind of initially popularized DMR, is that because it's an open standard, a lot of these Chinese companies sort of grabbed onto it and came out with the very expensive, inexpensive DMR handheld radio. Spectrally, and it's very efficient. So it, the signals themselves take up a very narrow piece of bandwidth. It's got good, it's a very tolerant codec. It's, high tolerance for errors, and supported by a wide range of radio vendors. You've probably seen a lot of companies out there, you know, like I said, Hytera and Motorola are the two big operations. Also, a lot of others like Kenwood has a variant. Other commercial manufacturers do. All of your Chinese like this one I've got, Redivis, TYT, Anytone, et cetera. You know, there's lots of different companies out there that are making DMR radios, and it's two repeaters in one because the frequency split in that time domain. You can have a single repeater can have two channels, having two simultaneous conversations, which is really kind of neat. When we talk about DMR, we kind of break things down into tiers: Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Tier 1 is just a simple one-slot DMR, kind of like maybe a simplex operation, radio to radio only. Tier 2, that's the most common variant, and that's in this variant of the specification, and that's 2 slots. Where you've got a signal, like I said, you've got 2 channels within that spectrum of range of frequency spectrum there. And you can use it for repeaters or simplex communications, and you can connect repeaters via the internet. And then Tier 3, not really has much of an application in the amateur realm yet, offers but multi-site capabilities, which means that if you're roaming with your DMR radio from repeater to repeater, the radio is able to pull multiple repeaters to find the strongest signal, and also has built-in trunking in that Tier 3. And like I said, because DMR uses what's called time division multiple access, it's splitting that frequency into 2 channels, the channel A and the channel B, and you can have 2 radios having, 2 sets of radios having simultaneous conversations. One set of radio on that A channel, or on that what's called time slot 1, and that second set of radios having another communication on that time slot 2. So talking about the sort of the efficiency aspect here. You've also in the amount of bandwidth, that Fusion uses for its C4 FM, or Icon uses for its D-Star. We can have, twice as many communications as we can with the with DMR. So moving ahead to the next slide, twice, half the channel bandwidth as analog radio. Traditional analog up to 25 kilohertz of channel bandwidth with DMR, and actually all of the digital modes. They occupy about 12.5 kilohertz of bandwidth. And then within that 12.5 kilohertz, because we're splitting the time domain, we're slicing everything up into chunks of time, we can have multiple conversations going in, or 2 sets of conversations going on to that 12.5 kilohertz. So scrolling ahead, you can kind of see the bandwidth, how the bandwidth sort of works its way out. You look at normal analog, I think is on the top one here. FM wideband. FM wideband, of course, is going to take up the widest amount of spectrum. As we're talking about frequency space. FM narrowband, about half the space of that. D-Star and C4 FM, D-Star is down to 6.5 kilohertz. C4 FM for system fusion, roughly the same. And then DMR, it's 12.5 kilohertz of bandwidth, but it's got but twice as many, it can fit 2 conversations into that spectrum. And if you look, if you see that little blue chunk, red chunk, blue chunk, red chunk, each of those chunks is like 30 milliseconds worth of time. So there's 30 milliseconds of digital data in each of those chunks, and that's you know, when I talk about splitting splitting your spectrum into that time domain, that that you get twice as much communication into a given amount of bandwidth. So, and then finally, just one last, you know, if we scroll ahead here, as you can see, you know, as just to you know, further illustrate the point that with the time domain multiple access, even though takes up 12.5 kilohertz, it's you know, it's got two conversations in there. Frequency domain, if you use the narrowest type of spacing, you know, channel spacing for the frequency domain of 6.5 kilohertz, then, you know, you would be able to make, you know, make an equivalent amount of communication, you know, bandwidth as what DMR could do with TDMA. So now it's kind of moving on to, are there any questions, you know, maybe I should, before we kind of move on, are there any questions so far? Does anybody have any questions that I could answer? I don't hear anything, so I'm just gonna keep on talking, and I'll take a, you know, because this is where things kind of get a little bit more, I don't know if we want to say confusing or what, but you know, some of, you know, what kind of catches people is what, you know, the DMR terminology. And what happens is with DMR, digital mobile radio, is that so much of this stuff has been taken from the commercial radio realm, and we're trying to shoehorn it into an amateur radio application. So things don't quite fit. And I think that, you know, I think that confusion where things don't fit is where a lot of hams get stuck on how this thing works. So first off, with the terminology, the first item is your DMR ID. And then the next would be, and we'll break all these down. And then, you know, next terminology is talk groups, time slots. I kind of talked about that a little bit, color codes, and then finally your code plug. So let's move on first to the DMR ID. Your DMR ID is basically, it's a number that identifies you as a unique user on a DMR network. Now in analog radio, you know, what identifies us as unique users would be our call sign. And on other digital systems like D-Star and System Fusion, they use the call sign as that sort of digital identifier. You know, it's if you've got a System Fusion radio, you plug your call sign into it so that when you transmit, your call sign is embedded into that transmission, and all is fine and well. That's not the case with DMR. What's embedded into your transmission on a DMR radio is a 6-digit numeric code, and that's your DMR ID number. So to get started with DMR, that's the first thing you have to do is to, you know, apply for your free ID number. So that when your transmission, you know, goes out into the, you know, any of the internet linked talk groups, you know, it can resolve, you know, that resolve where it needs to go, or identify it by that number. In most cases, you know, a person needs only one ID number. If you've got 2 radios, 3 radios, 4 radios, you know, you're only going to talk on one radio at a time. So if you had a handheld and a mobile in the car, you know, one ID is going to be sufficient. If you think you're going to need 2 IDs, you probably don't. But if you know, say you were going to use 2 radios simultaneously within yourself, you know, maybe then you would want to. And then to get your ID number, you just go to radioid.net. And it's a simple form you fill out. And I think you need to do like a copy of your license, and then you're good to go. It takes about up to 48 hours to get your ID number, but then you're set. Moving on would be your talk group. And that's a method of organizing, you know, it's a method of organizing radio traffic on a DMR network. very similar to, you know, the talk groups on a commercial trunking radio system. A talk group, you know, on a commercial system, you know, if you're familiar with that, those trunking systems, you know, say like Public Works might be a talk group, fire might be a talk group, police might be a talk group, and they're all running on that same trunked repeater system. It's the same with the DMR. But in the amateur realm, talk groups are broken down into, you know, maybe for countries, states, regions, cities, or even special interests. So we have a talk group for, you know, like I think I got on my little handheld here, I got it tuned to a talk group, the nationwide, you know, Brandmeister Nationwide Network talk group. There's also a Midwest talk group and a Wisconsin talk group. A lot of times I might have the radio just tuned to the Wisconsin talk group. Out east, or you are, you know, there'd be a New York talk group, et cetera, and or in a Northeast, a New England talk group or something like that. So you can use, you know, you may not want to talk to the whole, you know, like I said, a lot of these repeaters are linked to the internet, and you may not want to talk to everybody, you know, the whole world. So that's why, you know, things are kind of broken down into sort of those different groups or subsets that people can sort of hang out on. And that's the same, you know, as the system fusion rooms or the D-Stars reflectors. So moving on to, yes.
So why do they have talk groups that are so wide? What would be the practical use of a talk group that encompassed an entire state or even the country?
Yeah, you know, and it depends on, well, it depends on the level of traffic and its need. A lot of times, you know, like the nationwide talk group, people might hang on to that one for, you know, hang out on that one just to make a general QSO or contact. And then at that point, you could say to a person, let's move to a different talk group where then you could have a longer conversation without monopolizing the whole room. Statewide talk groups are really nice. You know, say if you're in an emergency communication setting, if there was a larger scale event, you could use the statewide talk group to maybe coordinate different Aries Races groups within a state or a region. So it's but basically that's, I know, like up by us, there's a talk group or a group of weather spotters that may hang on, say like the Wisconsin talk group, and then they can sort of communicate and coordinate statewide for weather activities. So that'd be one such illustration of why you would want a large talk group.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Time slots. I talked a little bit about time slots, and because DMR allows for 2 voice channels within the 12.5 kilohertz of data stream. You can have 2 communications going on simultaneously on your D-Star or on your DMR repeater. And those are labeled time slot number 1 and time slot number 2, you know, because we're kind of chopping things up within that time domain. You know, we just call them time slots. And basically what will happen is a repeater owner will assign certain talk groups to each time slot to sort of best manage the utilization of the repeater. So what you might find on a repeater, on a DMR repeater, is that your time slot 1 might have, say, local traffic only. So people that want to communicate just locally on the repeater without going out to the whole world, may stay on times, you know, the repeater might be programmed just to allow that on time slot 1. And then if a person wants to communicate, say on a statewide group or a regional talk group, then they would have to use one of them, you know, they may have to use that on, say, time slot 2. So that doesn't disturb the people that just want to use the repeater for local communications. Does that kind of make sense? I know that kind of, it sort of confuses people. And then finally, color code. That is it's very similar to the analog of CTC's SS or PL on analog systems. So it's just a way of say muting out traffic that you may not want to hear. You may, if there's people that are sharing, say on the commercial realm, if people are sharing a frequency, you might assign certain activities to one color code and another activity to another color code, and then they don't have to listen to each other, just like you would with CTCSS. Basically, in the amateur realm, it's a repeater is going to use the same color code for everything, and it's not so much to kind of block out, say like noise or interference, but just it's just everything might just be set to one color code within that realm. And then finally, your code plug, and that's just a fancy name for the programming file. So some DMR handhelds allow you to program the radio from the keypad, but it's very difficult. So you do almost all of your programming on the computer, and then you load it to the radio, and that file you load to the radio is called your code plug, so it's just another word for the programming file. So before we move on, does anybody have any questions? All right. Next up is our, I kind of talked a little bit about DMR networks, and there's two big networks out there in DMR world. One largest is what's called the Brandmeister Network. And what that is really it's all the linked repeater systems and the talk groups within those linked repeater systems. Now, one of the things with DMR is you really can't link from repeater directly to repeater. You have to use an intermediary, which might be the talk group. So two repeaters can link into the same talk group, and then they can communicate with each other. But you can't really mesh with them directly. And the largest repository of talk groups is on your Brandmeister network. And then the next up is DMR Mark, which basically is a bridging system for Motorola repeaters. So if you're in the Chicagoland area where Motorola is, you'll find a lot of repeaters on DMR Mark. But for the most part, people are, and same with DMR Plus. And DMR Plus and DMR Mark are pretty much merged together by this point. But so most of your DMR repeaters are running on the Brandmeister network, because that's got the largest availability of talk groups. So what do you need for equipment? Basically, a DMR handheld radio. A lot of people start with that. They're quite inexpensive. The cheapest are around $75 up to about $200 or so. TYT, Anytone, Redivis, Connect Systems, Itera, Motorola, of course, are all options. I think the most popular models right now seem to be the Anytone radios. They've kind of floated up to the top as the best of the Chinese radios. I know Bridgecom Systems. I know they've been selling a lot of the Anytones, and they seem to be very reliable. TYT is another good one, another radio system. So, and most of the models out there are DMR plus dual band with analog support, so you can use your DMR handheld also as an analog radio. Let's see, DMR mobiles, a little more money, of course, $300 and up. Anytone, is there again. They've come out with a very reliable DMR mobile radio that seems to be quite popular right now. And I think Bridgecom, yeah, they've been really pushing those. And then finally, the DMR hotspots. Not all of us may have easy access to a DMR repeater. So, or you may not want to, use your DMR radio on the local DMR repeater. You just want to, so you can use a hotspot to access right into those talk groups. And, cost is all over the place, $100 to $250, depending on, the level of complexity that you want to get. Some of the ones like the Shark RF, it's a nice all-in-one solution that will, it's just sort of plug and play. And then there's others where, you get you get yourself a Raspberry Pi, and then you get the little board that snaps into the Raspberry Pi, and then you have to load the software and make it all work. So depending on the level you want to kind of get into the system. One of the nice things about these DMR hotspots, though, is they're not really limited to just DMR. If you're running the Pi-Star software on the hotspot, which works on all the Raspberry Pi variants of these hotspots, you can also use the same spot for System Fusion and D-Star, all in one. You pick up the DMR handheld and you transmit, and it converts that to DMR and goes to the DMR talk group you've got programmed in. Same thing with if you pick up your Yaesu and you transmit, it'll do the same thing with System Fusion. It'll send it to the Fusion room that you've got programmed into the hotspot. So it's kind of a really nice feature. I've found with my hotspot that if I set the on the Yaesu radio, if I set the Digi ID on the Yaesu side, so if the Yaesu picks up a signal on that frequency that's not Fusion, it doesn't trip that Digi ID, then I can listen to DMR and I can listen to Fusion simultaneously. So one of the I think it's really a nice feature, especially if you like more than one digital mode with your handheld radios. And then finally, I've talked about a lot of good things about DMR, but there are some disadvantages to it. Number one, it's a more complex system than any of the other amateur-centric digital modes out there. There's quite a bit of a learning curve to programming these radios, because you have to set up your first your users. You got to plug users in, your talk groups, and then finally finally all of your channels. So it's a little bit of thought into that programming process. It's a little more difficult to dynamically join or monitor talk groups. You may have, like I said, if you're listening to a DMR repeater, if there's activity going on in a talk group that you may not have programmed into your handheld, you may not hear that activity. You'll see the busy light come on the radio, but that talk group may not. But that stuff, that transmission may not trip through because you're listening to a different talk group. Radios, some of the radios now have what they call a promiscuous mode, so you can listen to everything. Otherwise, and then switch to that talk group on the fly if you wanted to get into it. But otherwise, yeah, it's a little more of a challenge there. Build qualities all over the place. With the cheap DMR radios, they're not much better than the cheap analog Chinese radios. The good, the mid-range DMR radios are actually fairly decent. Like I said, the Anytones seem to be a very good, reliable brand if you're looking for a better quality DMR radio and you don't want to shell out for one of the Motorola's. And it's another digital mode to choose from. I mean, you've got this, you've got D-Star, you've got System Fusion, and now everybody's kind of segmented in their own sort of digital realms. There's some talk groups that'll cross connect between Fusion and DMR or D-Star, etc. But for the most part, it's you pick and choose where you're going to be, I guess, hanging out on. So with that, I will open it up to questions because that's the formal part of my presentation. So if you want to, you can close the screen share if you want. I don't think there's any more, so I can see your lovely faces. So thanks a lot for facilitating that.
Sure thing. I did have one question about the promiscuous mode. Is that something that the radio needs to possess, or can the hotspot actually perform that function for you of listening?
No, the hotspot will only work with one DMR channel at a time. So promiscuous mode won't work with a hotspot, but promiscuous mode will work with a DMR repeater. Because the way DMR works is that when you transmit, you're sending out two things. You're sending out your DMR ID and then the talk group you wish to talk on. So if so you could have a DMR repeater, say like we're sitting on a DMR repeater time slot 2, and I want to talk to the Midwest group, and there's another communication going on. They want to talk to, say, like the New England group. You could do that because, when I transmit, I'm sending it to that talk group. And then when they transmit, they're sending it to that talk group. And then when communications come back, it's coming back, from the talk group. And then the repeater retransmits it with that talk group's ID number, which your radio then is decoding because that's the talk group you've got your radio currently set at. So promiscuous mode would let you listen to everything because then it's like open squelch basically. So, but on a hotspot, when you transmit, then the hotspot's set to that talk group and you're not listening to any other talk group. So, all right. Any other questions?
Does hotspot transmission work with your radio to the hotspot or with your computer and puts it over the internet, which jumps to radio somewhere? How does that work?
Yeah, the way the hotspot works is basically, like I said, it's a little box, and then most of the time, the box is running. The hotspot software is running on say like a Pi Star or Raspberry Pi computer. So and then there's a board that slips into the Raspberry Pi, which has the radio transmitter, the transceiver, and then the codecs and whatnot to convert the signals into digital back into audio, analog and whatnot. So there is a computer involved. There are because it is because you've got that Raspberry Pi connected to the internet. So the way the whole chain would go is your handheld, you transmit, the board plugged into the Raspberry Pi receives it, and then that is decoded, and then the Pi sends that out via the internet to the appropriate talk group on the network that it's connected to, and then another person responds to your transmission in that talk group. Since the software running on the Raspberry Pi is connected to that talk group, it retrieves that information, and then to the board on the that's got the transceiver on it. It's recoded, transmitted out, and then picked up by your handheld radio. So
I think part of Harry's question though is, do you need a handheld radio to interface with the hotspot, or can you use your computer to connect to the hotspot and not need a handheld? But I think you do need a handheld.
You do. You really there is a method in which you can go to the Brandmeister website and interact with the talk groups individually through your computer, but it's a very klutzy process, and more often than not, it's not operative. So yeah, so for the best user experience, you do need a handheld radio. And
so the hotspot, I guess, makes a situation sort of like IRLP in the analog world versus Echolink in the analog world.
Correct. Yeah, I think that's a really good
way.
I think that's a really good way to kind of differentiate, because with Echolink, you can use the built-in speaker and microphone on your computer to talk to the Echolink nodes. IRLP, it doesn't allow that. It's just it's radio to device. So,
but the funny thing is with D-Star, you do have the availability of a dongle that you can use your computer, and with that dongle, you have the encode and decode, and you can communicate with D-Star just over the internet with your computer. You're saying a dongle doesn't exist?
There are dongles for that you can plug into the USB port of your computer, but they don't. But they still they need that radio interface for DMR.
Lou has his hand up. Lou,
okay.
If you unmute.
We have a question about adjusting the receiver volume.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that at least I have not found a way to adjust the volume of the tones. The ordinary audio, it's easy. You change the volume control, but I don't know any way to adjust the various tones that come through. So if you have a comfortable listening mode, and then the tones come on, they can blast you out of the room.
No. If you're listening to the digital audio,
clarify what tones you're referring to, because I don't know tones.
I'm talking about the tones. For example, you get a
the acknowledgement tone.
The acknowledgement tones and rejection tone and stuff like that.
That's up to radio. I'll bet those differ.
Yeah, I think that might. Yeah, that would be radio centric, and I know some of them the beeps and boops of the radio tend to get quite loud. I think they're on some manufacturers have on the system menu a way of adjusting the volume of those or turning them off. But I think it's either one or the other. It's either loud or none. So.
Yeah, I know that on mine it's either on or off. But I was wondering if there's an update to the operating system or anything like that would give that moderation.
There could be. Yeah, I don't know. It depends on the brand of radio you have, and if there's been a firmware update. That is something I'd have to check into.
And for some radios, there's third-party firmware too. There's hacks to some of these radios that can expand the memory and add the promiscuous mode where it wasn't provided by the manufacturers. There's all kind of things available.
Mm-hmm. Which will no doubt void the radio's warranty.
Yeah, but with these inexpensive radios, there's not much of a warranty to begin with. So, unfortunately. Any other questions?
Mm-hmm. This one's actually for Richie. What we have a DMR repeater, right? Where did Richie go? Did he leave us?
We do. The answer is yes, though.
Yes. Okay. Are you okay now?
And we have a live
now I hear you.
Group also.
We have a DMR repeater. What talk groups does it use?
Many. You know, it's funny because basically I use the Limark local, but we have worldwide, North America, and then a whole bunch of other things. But I'm honestly, because I stay within those 3 channels, I'm not familiar with everything. Anybody else more using more of the DMR channels that we have, talk groups?
I know a lot of them. Yeah, a lot of the repeaters, DMR repeaters, will have maybe 1 or 2 talk groups might be static, and then the dynamic ones may, you can punch any one you want in, but it may only be active for 15 minutes at a time if it doesn't receive any traffic past that 15-minute time period. So.
And is there a website or someplace that you can go to find a list of all the talk groups that exist? And
yes.
Also, if you wanted to create a talk group of your own, how would you do that?
If you go to the Brandmeister website, you can look at you can see a list of all of the active talk groups. To get your own talk group, I think you have to petition them to add it to their servers.
Are we on? Yeah, we're on DMR Mark. So if you go to the DMR Mark webpage, you can see all the repeaters in the local area and what talk groups they sponsor. So just search the DMR-Mark, M-A-R-C.
Anyone have any other question? There must be someone who wants to know something.
Nobody put everybody asleep.
I'll ask another one about the radio ID. I don't know if this is still the case, but it was originally that there was like no security at all. You could plug like anyone else's radio ID into your radio and assume their identity, which is hard for me to believe that with the digital technology, there isn't some password protection or something like that. Is that still the case, that there's no security at all on the radio ID that you program?
They're pretty much, yeah, I think that's pretty much still the case. I mean, to get an ID, it used to be, if you wanted a radio ID, you would just have to ask for it, give them, you would give them your call sign, and then they would look it up online to see if it was legit and then issue you an ID. Since that time, within the last maybe year and a half ago, they've kind of tightened things up so that if you want a DMR ID, you need to show take a picture of your license and then as verify or some, some other piece of identification to prove who you are. But that just issues you a DMR ID. I mean, you could purchase a radio, you could punch in any 6-digit number you want, and you could get onto the network, and really I don't think anybody's really going to stop you, because I don't think, once your ID is issued, there's no way of checking. They can ban IDs, and there's people that have, been banned, but
that's
other
just
than
my
that,
point. They can ban ID, but that bans the numerical number, and then you just plug a different number in, and you're back on the network.
No, exactly. You just pick a new one. So
yeah, that's too bad.
If you remember, when we first got started, we thought that we would have the privacy of being able to select who would be able to use the DMR machines. But it turned out that that would be if you were a Motorola only, using a Motorola repeater and Motorola radios. You could set it up in such a way that it would be totally private. But obviously that doesn't apply with all the variety of radios that you have access to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's, and I think if you've got a Motorola repeater, you can lock out non-Motorola users then. But yeah, that's one of the advantages of spending the extra money for Motorola. But unfortunately, it doesn't translate into what the other manufacturers are doing.
Well, it wasn't a problem of the Motorola repeater as much as it was saying to all of our members, everyone must now own a Motorola radio.
Yeah.
When you can buy something else for $49, you're not going to spend $250 on a Motorola radio. But people have been generally good. You know, we don't have the control that we'd like as a club because it is an expense for us. But I think people have been generally good about the use of DMR. And some people, you know, maybe have been a little abusive in overusing it, but usually when we talk to them, they cut down on their usage and make it available to everyone. So it hasn't been terrible.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the things too, is if you're the type of individual that likes to rag you on you know, DMR, then get a hotspot. And you can get into that talk group and talk all you want, and you're not occupying the physical space of that, the physical frequency of the repeater.
What was that website to get the ID again, please?
It was radioid.net. I think that was correct. Look at my notes here.
That's
correct.
Yeah.
Thank you.
radioid.net.
Yep.
Yeah. Oops. If you go to the n2nsa.net site, you can see all the local repeaters in the New York area with the frequencies, their time slot, their color codes, and what channels they support on the DMR Mark network. There must be about 15 to 20 repeaters in the area here. I had it on my screen before, but they cut it down half of it in the middle, so it only shows half the screen. So
yeah, if you go radioid.net, they have a map that you can look at the repeaters and the area. It also has a list of their talk groups that are on that repeater.
You have to keep on expanding that map. It's a nuisance.
It's a big map.
Yeah, zoom in.
You got to keep on zooming in locally. It starts worldwide. Then you got to zoom into the United States, and you got to zoom into the East Coast. Then you got to zoom into New York. But all the DMR repeaters are controlled by a C bridge, which is up Bernie NY4Z in Yonkers. So all our repeaters link through the internet.
And that's one of the particulars of DMR Mark, because DMR Mark's a Motorola system, so the C bridge is the network interface between all of the repeaters.
Also,
all right, anything else?
I just thought I would mention, you know, when you talked before about the requirement to have a code plug and you need your computer to program the radio, there is a kind of unique DMR radio. It's called RFinder. Are you familiar with that? Where it has a built-in database of all the DMR repeaters, and it'll even show you in order the distance between you and the nearest DMR repeater. And all you got to do is tap on the one you want to talk to, and it loads the information from its own database into the radio, and you're good to go without like any programming whatsoever.
Yeah, I've seen the RFinder. It's
There's
kind of
an
a
ad
neat system.
for it. There's an ad for it right on the top of the radioid.net homepage right now.
Oh wow, cool. It's expensive, but it does work. It works well.
Yeah, it would be nice I suppose if you do a lot of traveling, that might be a good investment.
And it does, by the way, the database has the digital and analog frequencies, so it's a dual mode.
Oh, wow.
It's also supposed to be a cell phone, so you can use that as a cell phone also.
It is. It's an Android. That's correct. It's an Android operating system, and if you put a SIM in it, you can use it as a phone also.
All right. Anything else?
Sounds good.
Good conversation. So.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Okay, well, it's my pleasure. It's glad we were able to come in here. These Zoom meetings have been becoming a lot more popular. That's for sure. This is like the second or third club I've done a presentation for. So of various things, and it's great to see different, how different clubs are kind of staying connected. I know we've tried to meet in person over the summer months, but now our group is, we're kind of at a crossroads because things have gotten a lot worse here in Wisconsin, and we're not quite, I think we're going to have to get the other hams up on this technology so we can keep meeting over the winter time, because you can't sit around outdoors and kibitz like you can in the summer months.
How did we hook up with you in Wisconsin all the way from Long Island?
Oh, Harry found him.
I've been combing the internet for possible presentation topics, and I found Michael's YouTube channel and thought that he might be able to give us a presentation. I have one more quick question for you, Michael. On the radioid.net site, I see 3 different things to link. One says register a repeater, which is obvious. And one says register NXDN. What is that? And the last one says register account, which is what I presume an individual would use.
Yes. Register an account would be what an individual would use. NXID or NXDN, that is Kenwood's DMR variant. So it's quite similar. It's similar, but not quite. So there's not like 100% compatibility, but very similar.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right.
Anyone else have any more questions? Nothing heard. Then I will thank you very much for having presented this evening, Michael.